This week on Irish Bandit Revolution, I talk about one of my all-time favorite Disney movies in Pete's Dragon. Plus, I also discuss the 2016 remake. Which one did I like better? Which one did I enjoy more? Let's find out right now. Irish Bandit Revolution begins now. Welcome back to another edition of Irish Bandit Revolution. I hope everyone is having a great week. I, as always, am your host, the one, the only, the second Irish Bandit. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to thank everyone for the great feedback on the look of the show now. I've been getting some great feedback. Everybody's loving the new intro, so that is great to hear. Big changes coming up. I'm going to talk about more later on in this episode. But let's just get right down to it. Like I said in the beginning, we're talking about one of my favorite Disney movies. I've loved this movie since I was about 6 years old. Something about it just really stuck with me all these years. And I think it kind of helps that it was also one of my dad's favorite movies because in the original movie, it takes place on the East Coast. And that's where my dad grew up. So I think that's what really attracted him to the movie. But Pete's Dragon has just been a family favorite of mine since I was a kid. And more recently, I watched the 2016 remake. And, well, let's just get right into it. Before we do that, let's get into a little bit of backstory about both movies. The original 1977 version takes place in the early 20th century, probably around the 1900s, where we meet a young boy named Pete and his best friend, Elliot, who is a 20-foot-tall dragon. Pete and Elliot are being chased by the nefarious Gauguin family, a backwoods family who has purchased Pete through an orphanage and make no bones about that they own him lock, stock, and barrel. After escaping the Gaugans, Pete and Elliot finally come across the small Maine fishing town of Passamaquoddy, which is quite the name. It's pretty long. There, poor Pete gets into a whole bunch of trouble because of Elliot. Along the way, we are introduced to Lampy, the lighthouse keeper of Passamaquoddy, and the town drunk, unfortunately. They're the first person that Pete and Elliot meet, and no one believes Lampy when he says he's seen a dragon out in the streets of Passamaquoddy. Not even his own daughter, Nora, played by Helen Reddy. Lampy is played by the great Mickey Rooney. Eventually, Nora meets Pete down in the cave by the lighthouse, and she invites him back up to the lighthouse for food and to get cleaned up, because he was pretty dirty by that point. Along the way, there's more mischievous happenings from Elliot, and we're also introduced to the second villain of the movie, that being Doc Terminus, a shuckster and a snake oil salesman who cons the people of Passamaquoddy into buying his phony remedies. Along the way, the Doc and the Gaugans meet up, and they make a mutually beneficial agreement that the Gaugans will get Pete as long as Doc Terminus gets Elliot. This leads to one of the most emotional final scenes that there was when Elliot finally destroys the bill of sale for the Gaugans, releasing Pete from his bonds. After all the destruction he has caused in the town, Elliot finally saves the mayor of Passamaquoddy and reveals himself to the townspeople. Pete finally has a home with Nora Lampy and her fiancé Paul, who was lost at sea, but Elliot finally found him, brought him home. He had amnesia, but after he's cured of his amnesia, he comes back home to Passamaquoddy to start his life again with Nora, Pete, Lampy. But unfortunately, this means that Elliot has to say goodbye to Pete, for there are other children in this world who need his help more than Pete does now. In the 2016 version, again, we were introduced to Pete and his dragon best friend named Elliot. Only this time, things are a little different. We actually meet Pete's parents. Sadly, though, Pete and his parents are involved in a car accident out on the highway that actually kills his parents. So we're taking a pretty dark turn already when we're talking about the remake. Pete is lost in the forest with animals closing in until finally a big green furry dragon finds him and protects him, that forming a friendship. 6 years later, Pete is still living out in the forest among the wild. He's now more feral than than Pete was in the original movie, where he is introduced to where he meets a park ranger named Grace and her daughter Natalie and her husband Jack, who was Natalie's father, but Grace is her stepmother. Funny how they work these things into the movie. Natalie climbs up a tree after Pete, but Pete being the better climber, Natalie falls out of the tree. Pete tries to save her. Unfortunately, he kind of saves her, but she does end up skinning her knee, which is, unavoidable. But Pete gives chase through the forest with Grace after him. Unfortunately, Pete trips, falls, hits his head on a rock, and is knocked unconscious. Pete soon wakes up in the Millhaven Hospital. That's another thing. The difference about the movies is that this now takes place in a logging town named Millhaven instead of a fishing town in Maine. So I'm guessing it's northwestern United States this time. So anyway, Pete wakes up in the hospital, is completely freaked out by what's going on, and escapes the hospital, jumping on buses and cars like the little feral child that he is. So eventually, Grace takes him home to her, takes her home to her home, of course, where Elliot finally finds Pete and is like, okay, Pete's safe, he's fine. One thing I've noticed between the two movies, this Elliot isn't as mischievous as the Elliot in the original movie, so. While Pete is with Grace, some of the loggers, led by Jack's brother Gavin, go off hunting Elliot in the forest. Grace tries to take Pete into town the next day to child services, but she just can't do it. Gavin again takes some of the loggers into the forest to hunt Elliot. Eventually, Pete introduces Elliot to Grace, her father, and Natalie and Jack. When Gavin tries to shoot him, tranquilizing him. I'm just looking through my notes here. Ellie tries to fly away but doesn't get far before the tranquilizers take effect. Gavin brings Elliot back into town. Pete and Natalie sneak into the mill to free Elliot. Unable to fly, Elliot turns invisible. Grace's father offers to help Pete get Elliot out of the mill. Gavin gives chase. He's unable to track. Jack and Grace unfortunately fall down the unstable bridge, but Elliot is able to save them. Pete and Elliot fly off to the heart of the forest, where Elliot tells Pete that he needs to join Grace and her family. And in the end, Pete, with his new family, finds Elliot once more with his family. So now that you know the gist of both movies, let's talk about which one I liked better. Now, before I get into that, like I said before, I was such a fan of the original movie growing up that I thought that a remake was going to be sacrilege. Like, no joke. I was like, Disney, you cannot do this. You cannot make a remake of Pete's Dragon. Pete's Dragon, well, I won't say it was perfect. Pete's Dragon was such a fun movie and a movie that I totally enjoy to this very day. Then I saw the remake and I was like, okay, Disney, you did a really good job with that. You gave it more of a heart. So before we talk about which one I like better, let's just get into some of the differences between both movies, because there were some big differences. Like the original 1977 movie was a straight out musical. Like it goes like boom, 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 talking, 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 music, boom, 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 talking, music. Whereas last year's movie was just a straight up drama. It was straight up family drama. Honestly, it had a lot more heart to it than the original movie. You know, something back from 1977, you'd think it would have the heart, but you get that more with this movie. Again, in this movie, in the original, you had characters like Lampy and Nora. You had Doc Terminus. You had his sidekick Hoagie. You had the Gogan family. In the remake, you had none of those characters. You had all new characters. The only same characters you had were Pete and Elliot, and that was it. In the remake, you had Grace. You had her daughter Natalie. You had her father. You had her husband Jack. You had his husband Gavin. And the cast, it's hard to pick between the casts because they were both, I won't say star-studded, but they had a great cast of well-known actors to them. Like you had in the original, you had Helen Reddy as Nora, you had Mickey Rooney as Lampy, Jim Dale as Doc Terminus, you had Red Buttons as Hoagie, you had Shelley Winters as Lena Gogan. In one of the supporting roles, you had Jeff Conway as her son. I can't remember whether he was Grover or Willie. I think it was Willie. I think it was Willie Gogan. This was a year before he would go on to play Kaniki in Grease. So you had a great cast to this movie, and you had Sean Marshall starring as Pete. In the remake, you have Bryce Dallas Howard as Grace. You have Robert Redford as her father. You have Wes Bentley as her husband Jack. Carl Urban as her brother-in-law. So not a bad cast with this one either. Like, I will say this, I'm not a huge fan of Carl Urban. I will admit that. He's had a couple movies that I've liked him in, but on the whole, he's an actor I can take or leave. I don't mind him in this movie. Like, I think the only movies that I really enjoy him in are this, the two Lord of the Rings movies he was in, and Dread. So those are about the only Carl Urban movies I like. Everything else I can just forget, and I won't even get into that dreadful Star Trek remake. So, okay. So we've talked all about the differences. Let's talk about which movie I like best. I've broken this down into 4 different categories. Best Pete, Best Elliot, Best Supporting Cast, and overall Best Story. So let's get into which I felt was the best Pete. So before I get into this, I just want to say quickly that this portion of the video is directly inspired by the Nostalgia Critics' old versus new. So this isn't something new that I came up with. This is a concept that has been done before, just so nobody thinks that this is my idea. But this is the idea of Doug Walker, and I'm just doing this for this movie. So, all right, well, let's get right down into it. Best Pete. Now, both boys show considerable heart and tenderness. The Pete from 1977, though, is quick to blame Elliot, feeling the town won't accept them. We learn more of 2016 Pete's story about his parents' tragic death and how he met Elliot, whereas Pete and Elliot have already been together some time in the original. So that's something I would have liked to see them expand upon in the original movie. So I'm glad we got that in the 2016 movie. How did Pete meet Elliot? What happened to Pete's parents? Pete from the original wants a home, where remake Pete wants to stay in the forest with Elliot. So you see that because, Pete wants to get away from the Gogans, whereas Pete just wants to stay with Elliot in the forest forever. So I think choosing a better Pete is tough, though the slight edge I will give to the 2016 Pete. Next up on the list, we have Better Elliot. Elliot in the original movie is a goofy protector. The remake version isn't played for laughs. He's more of a serious, not so serious, but he has a friendly look to him, much like the original Elliot. And the design of both dragons is so different. Like you had the original Elliot, who who had a face more like a camel, and he was a big, scaly dragon. Well, he was animated, so you'd have to assume he was scaly, whereas Elliot in the remake has a head like a tiger and is completely furry from head to tail. So, both versions truly love Pete and are caring to his friends, Nora and Lampy in the original, Grace and Natalie in the remake. As much as the remake impressed me, I can't go against the original. There's just something about Elliot in the original 1977 movie that is just endearing to me. And I can't help but love him. I like Elliot in the remake, but I will always love Elliot in the original. So point goes to the original. So we've talked about Pete and we've talked about Elliot. So let's talk about the supporting cast and which one was better. When you have a lineup that includes Helen Reddy, Mickey Rooney, Red Buttons, and Jim Dale, you can't go wrong for a musical. That was such a wonderful cast that knew what they were doing, were very competent, had great acting skills, great singing skills, especially Helen Reddy. She was just coming off the success of Hi, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. And Jim Dale, again, another great singer, longtime Disney actor. He was in Hot Lead and Cold Feet. So you had just a wonderful cast with the original. But then in 2016, you have Robert Redford. So just for that alone, I got to give the point to the remake. Now, while there are some people who will see this as the same story, there are big enough differences to both. Like in the remake, you don't have the Gauguin subplot. You don't have the addition of Nora and Lampy. You have Grace, her father, which I guess could be considered, Nora and Lampy, but Nora never had a daughter. So there's no, like I said, no Gauguin family, no Doc Terminus. Pete is a more feral boy in the remake. He's not housebroken, let's just say, as Pete is in the 1977 version. So he's howling a lot more. He even barks at a dog a couple times, so which I thought was a nice little touch there. There's a definite change in Elliot. He's not as goofy as he is in the remake. I don't want to say serious, but there are little goofy moments once in a while, but he's not constantly getting Pete in trouble like the 1977 version is. Whereas, he's tromping his big feet through cement or harassing an egg salesman. The only real thing that Elliot does in this movie is knock over a logging truck, and that's it. So, while both have good stories, the 2016 version fleshes out Pete better, which I got to give him a point for that, and ultimately the win. After watching it twice, I felt that the 2016 version was superior to the original. It hurts me to say because I love the original. But if you love both movies, then that's fantastic. Like what you like. I love both movies. I will always love the original. It will always be a family favorite. But I just felt that there was more to the remake than there was to the original. More story. We learned more about Pete, where we didn't know anything really about Pete before he met Elliot. Because when we meet him originally, he's riding on Elliot's back. And when we meet Pete in the remake, he's riding in the car with his mom and dad reading a story. So, personally, both movies are great. But I got to give the remake the win here. It just did a better job overall. Before we wrap this week's episode, I do want to give you a few quick programming updates. Coming this Thursday, there'll be a new mini-series, I guess you could call it. It's kind of an add-on to Irish Bandit Revolution. It's going to be called Irish Bandit Extra, where I'm going to talk about a subject related to this week's episode. This week, I'm going to be talking about Disney remakes, and a certain Disney remake that has just been announced that I am not looking forward to. I guess you can say I cannot feel the love tonight with this one, and that was a big hint. Also coming up this Friday is going to be another edition of High Five. Now, I don't know I didn't announce a new what the episode theme will be on the last episode because I had no idea what I was going to do, to be quite honest with you. This week on the High Five, I'm going to be talking about 5 things that I am looking forward to in the final season of Game of Thrones. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, but I don't feel the need to go out and tell everyone, I'm part of the 99% that watches Game of Thrones, where you see the people, I'm part of the 1%. Do you want a trophy or something? Either way, sorry for my rambling there. We will talk about the final season of Game of Thrones, what I'm looking forward to in that. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give this episode a big old thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. Let me know in the comments section down below if you like the original Pete's Dragon, if you like the remake Pete's Dragon, if you like both. Doesn't matter. Let me know down below. Don't forget to share this video anywhere you can on Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media outlet you wish. Over my shoulder right here, you can see a link to last week's episode. It's the season premiere of Irish Bandit Revolution. I get into more detail about Saskatoon Expo. Don't forget to visit www.redbubble.com to get your Irish Bandit Revolution merchandise. We have stickers, we have phone cases, we have t-shirts, we have tank tops, we have leggings, anything you can think of. Go pick up some Irish Bandit merchandise, support the revolution. And do not forget If you're not subscribed already to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We're up to 54 subscribers now, so that is great. And if you're already subscribed, hit that bell button and you will be notified whenever I upload anything new. Be it Irish Bandit Revolution, be it a taste test. Oh yeah, and there's going to be a taste test coming soon, as suggested by Angel B. So that'll be coming up very, very soon. But yeah, Irish Bandit Revolution, taste test, high five, the new Irish Bandit Extra, whatever is uploaded to the channel. All right, I'm losing my voice and I'm getting so much saliva, but I do want to tell you about next week's episode, as Rank It will return, and I will be ranking all 4 seasons of one of the funniest TV shows that I've ever seen. I can't believe that this show was canceled after only 4 seasons, especially on a cliffhanger. Like, what the hell, NBC? We're going to be ranking all 4 seasons of My Name is Earl. Guys, until then, have a great week. I'm the Bandit, and I'm out of here.